Hi, I'm Mike from 1A Auto. We've been selling auto parts for over 30 years.
What's up guys, I'm Andy from 1A Auto. Today I'm going to show you how to install this new hub on this 2007 Mini Cooper S. If you need this part or other parts for your vehicle, click the link in the description and head over to 1aauto.com. We're going to take this center cap off. I'm just going to use a straight blade screwdriver. I'm going to use a rag so I don't scratch the wheel. Just get in here. There is a little slot on the cap right here. So pull that off. I'm going to loosen up these lug bolts. I'm going to use a 17mm socket and a breaker bar. Just crack them free before we lift the vehicle. Now I'm going to raise and support the vehicle. I'm using a 2-post lift. If you're doing this at your house, you can do it on jack and jack stands. All right, now I'll take these lug studs off, or lug bolts. Use my 17mm socket and a ratchet. Now when I take the last one off, I'm going to hold the wheel on because otherwise this is going to fall. So I'll put a little pressure on the wheel while I take the last bolt out. Pull that out. I can grab the wheel and pull it off. Before we take this caliper off, on the passenger side on this vehicle, we have a brake pad wear sensor. I'm just going to use some needle nose pliers. I'm going to grab it right here. It's a good idea to replace this when you're doing a brake job, but it's not 100% necessary. Especially if you break it, then you should replace it. Just wiggle it back and forth a little bit. All right, so our sensor just cracked here when we were trying to pull it out. So we're gonna have to replace this sensor. That's why it's a good idea to get a new one. All right, so I'll take that off there. And over here on the bleeder, slide this cap off. And we can pull the sensor wire out of your way. And if you were going to reuse this, just set that aside. And using needle nose, trying to get it out, didn't really help us out here. This is just in there too long. It's been in here since brand new, so we'll just take the caliper off and get it off when the pads come out. One thing you want to keep in mind when you're working on the rear brakes, before we pull the caliper off, you are going to want to make sure the parking brake is released. If you have an automatic transmission, leave it in park. If you have a manual transmission, make sure you leave it in gear, and it's a good idea to chock the front wheels so you do not roll. I'm going to take these two bolts out. I'm going to use a 13mm socket and a ratchet. This one's in there pretty good. And I can see that the stud is spinning. I'm going to use a 15mm wrench to keep this caliper slide pin from spinning. Take this bolt out, do the same with the top one. It's on there pretty tight because there's some thread locker on there. I'm going to slide this caliper off. I'm just going to use a straight blade screwdriver and just pry it out a little bit. I can try to compress it, but it's really not going to compress too much. All right, got that off. I'm going to grab a bungee cord. I'm just going to slide it around this strut here. Hook it onto the caliper here, and then right there. Keep that out of your way. You don't want to put any tension on the brake hose. At this point I can take the pads out. These are frozen in there pretty good, so I'll take my straight blade screwdriver, get in there, pry it out a little bit. And as you can see, this is frozen in there pretty good, so we're gonna have to replace that. And same with this side. Pull that off. I need to take these two caliper bracket bolts out. They're a 16 millimeter, so I'll use a 16 millimeter socket and a breaker bar. Let's just break them loose first. Then I'm going to switch to a 16 millimeter socket and a ratchet. It's kind of hard to reach those bolts, so just pull the socket off and loosen it up by hand. All right, then I'm going to hold the bracket while I take the last bolt out. When I pull the last bolt out, then I will just grab the bracket and slide it back. All right, so we're going to take this bolt out that holds the rotor on. I'm going to use this impact driver. You can get these at 1aauto.com. And I'm going to use a T50 socket. Slide this on here. Hold this. You're going to hold a little bit pressure like you're loosening it, and then hit it with a hammer. Now I'll take my socket and my ratchet. Just hold the rotor while I'm taking this out. You could also use an impact gun if you struggle a little bit. If you have air available to you, pull that out. Pull the rotor right off. There's 4 bolts that hold this hub assembly on. I'm just going to take some rust penetrant. They're pretty rusty. And just spray them down. Let them soak for a little while. That'll just make it easier to take the bolts out. Right, now I'm going to take a 16 millimeter socket and a ratchet. We'll take these 4 bolts out. Pull that bolt out, and we're going to do the same with the other 3. These back 2 bolts, I'm actually going to use an extension because this sway bar link is in my way. So I can go around the sway bar link to be able to access these 2 bolts. All right, now these bolts are loose. I can slide these out. This hub is stuck on this knuckle. It's rusted with the steel hub and the aluminum knuckle. It's generally causes a lot of corrosion and causes things to seize up. So I'm going to use a hammer. I'm just going to tap it. Slide it right off. Here's our old wheel hub bearing. Here's our new hub bearing assembly from 1aauto.com. The shapes are the same. Has this little ear at the top. This reluctor wheel for the ABS is the same. The front hub surface is the same. Get yours at 1aauto.com and you'll be ready to rock and roll. Before we install the new hub, I'm just going to use a wire brush. Just clean up this area where there was some corrosion. You can go on the inside right here. You could also use some like sandpaper or some emery cloth. Just be careful around the wheel speed sensor right there. Just take a little brake parts cleaner. Just clean this up. Just wipe it with a rag. I'm just going to use a little bit of copper anti-seize. This is just a high temp anti-seize just in case this ever has to come off again. Then it won't stick. So prevent any corrosion from happening between the 2 surfaces. Just a little light coat is good. Then I'll take this hub. There's a little nub right there at the top, so that's going to go up. Install that in position, then I'll take my bolts, get those started from the back side. Once I get all those bolts started, I'm going to take my socket and ratchet and start to tighten them down. Try to tighten them down evenly. Don't go too much. gonna like crisscross. Start with this one. Once it's down a little bit, then cross over to the other ones. Then I'll cross over to this one on the back here with my extension, snug this one down. I'm going to use my torque wrench and a 16mm socket. I'm going to torque these to 41 foot-pounds. We're going to clean this brake caliper bracket. I'm just going to use a wire brush. Clean this area right here. We're going to clean these pad clips, brake pad clips. Take a flat blade screwdriver, just get underneath here, peel them off. Take that off. If the back's dirty, just clean this off a little bit. And then if there's any rust in here, we're going to clean this off. This will just make the brake pads slide better. Take a pad clip, reinstall, line it up, push it down. We'll do the same with the other side. Then we're going to take these caliper slide pins, just hold the rubber grommet down, pull the pin out, take a little brake parts cleaner, spray that, take a rag and wipe it. Then on the caliper side, just spray some down the hole. You can take the rag and try to clean some of that. Then I'm going to take some brake caliper grease, just put it on the pin. Slide the pin back in, make sure it seats the rubber grommet. Do the same with this side. All right, before we install the rotor, I'm just going to take some brake parts cleaner, wash it off. There is a protective coating on the rotor so that it doesn't rust. So we want to wash that off this side, also on this side. And then wipe it with a rag. Now we're going to install the rotor. Just line the holes up. There's an extra hole right here for this bolt, this Torx bolt. It's going to go there. Get that started. And I'll use my T50. Alright, so now I'm going to tighten this down a little bit with my ratchet. Make sure all the holes are lined up good. You don't want to tighten this too much, just snug. That just holds the rotor from falling off. I'm going to install this brake caliper bracket. Just slide it over the rotor. Take the brake caliper bolts. I'll just use my 16mm socket and an extension to try to get it to line up. Just get that started. Now I'll get the top one started. I'm going to use a ratchet and just snug them up. Snug, and then I'm going to torque them. I'm going to use my torque wrench and I'm going to torque these to 48 foot-pounds. Alright, now we're going to install the pads in the caliper bracket. There is an inboard pad and an outboard pad. The difference is this has this little extra ears on top, whereas the outboard one is flat. This is where the caliper piston is going to sit, and also the brake pad warning sensor is going to go in there. So slide that on the inside, just like that, and then this one's going on the outside. Next we have to compress this caliper piston. We need this special tool. We actually sell this tool at 1aauto.com. It has different little ears on this so that we can take an extension and line this up with the piston on the caliper. can take a ratchet and slowly tighten this down. You can spin this. As this is spinning, it's compressing the piston back into the caliper. It's pushing fluid back through the lines, back through the master cylinder, and up into the reservoir. It's a good idea to check your reservoir when you're done the brake job to make sure it's not over full. And adjust accordingly. And that looks like it's down all the way. And there's not any buttons on the actual pads that have to get lined up with anything. So that can go on just like that. Now we're going to take the bungee cord off. Take the brake caliper, slide it over the pads and the bracket, just like that. We'll reinstall these caliper bolts. There is thread locker on these bolts. You can put new thread locker on, or if you get new bolts, generally they come with thread locker. Now I'm going to use a 13mm socket, a ratchet, and a 15mm wrench. And I'm just going to hold the slide pin with the wrench and snug up this bolt. Just snug that one up. And I'll do the same with this one. Now I'm going to use a torque wrench and I'm going to torque these bolts to 25 foot-pounds. Your brake pad wear sensor may break, so we're going to show you how to replace it and put a new one in. So with this broken sensor over on the bleeder, we're just going to slide up this little bleeder cap. This is going to come off here, and then there's a clip. This was clipped on over here. Pull that off, and it's clipped in right here, and right here as well. And right here, just slide this through, clipped in right here. Leave that clip there. And then there's a connector behind here. You can slide the shield down a little bit. We're gonna pull on the connector. Behind this blue connector. Slide this down and out. If we pull it over here, it makes it a little easier to work on. Push this little button and pull the connector out. So now we have our new sensor wire right here and connector. We want to line this up, make sure it goes on the right way. It only goes on one way. If you flip it over, it's not going to lock in. So there's like a horseshoe like curve on the bottom of this, and then kind of like a little box on the top, and then also a groove in the top of the connector. So get those lined up. Line that up like that and lock it in place. Now we're going to fish this back up here, and it's going to get secured behind this blue connector back here. If you have to take the blue connector out, you can pull that out. I'm just going to slide it behind it. And it's going to click in back there. And this is going to follow the other wire right here. There's a little retainer right here. It goes on the lower control arm frame. There is another thing to secure it right here. Depending on who makes the connector, it may be different, or who makes the sensor. So I'll take some needle nose pliers, just try to push this through. That looks good. And this is just going to follow this other wire. And I'll hook this over here at the brake pad first. Just take this. This is going to go on the brake pad with this little round piece facing the rotor. Take my needle nose pliers to help assist getting this in. Line this up with the inboard brake pad and just push it on. Kind of like locks in place a little bit, just like that. Push it down, that's good. This is going to connect to the bleeder right here. Just push that over like that. And then these will connect to the wires. Just like that. We'll do the same with the other ones. A little bit tricky. And slide that through, just like that. Now we're going to install the wheel and tire. Before I do that, sometimes it's pretty difficult to install the wheel on this type of setup because it does not have studs. So what you can do is get one of these kits we actually sell at 1A Auto. This has the correct thread for this vehicle. You just slide these into here, just like that. And we can take our wheel, you can line the holes up. Then it'll actually line those up, position that in the right location for you. We can install our lug nuts. And that kind of holds the wheel for you, so you don't have to try to balance it. Once you get those two lug nuts on, you can take these out. And then put the other two lug bolts on, and you're good to go. Now I'm going to use a torque wrench and a 17mm socket, and I'm going to torque these lug bolts to 90 foot-pounds. And I'm going to do it in a cross pattern so that it torques the wheel down evenly. I'm just going to go back and double check, make sure everything's tight. That's good. Now we're going to install this center cap. There's a little nub right there. You're going to line that up with any of these. Line it up straight like that. And just lock it in place. After we're done the brake job, we're going to want to pump the brake pedal because there's a little bit of an air gap between the caliper piston and the brake pads. So to eliminate that air gap, just pump the brake pedal.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at 1aauto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.